place stank. A queer mingled stench that only the ice-buried cabins of an Antarctic camp know, compounded of reeking human sweat and the heavy fish oil stench of melted seal blubber. An overtone of liniment combated the musty smell of sweat and snow-drenched furs. Yet somehow, through all that reek of human beings and their associates, dogs, machines, and cooking, came another taint. It was a queer, neck-ruffling thing, a faintest suggestion of an odor alien among the smells of industry and life. And it was a life smell. But it came from the thing that lay bound with cord and tarpaulin on the table, dripping slowly, methodically onto the heavy planks, dank and gaunt under the unshielded glare of the electric light.
These are the opening lines of Who Goes There by John W. Campbell Jr., first published in Astounding Science Fiction in 1938, not even 30 years after Roald Amundsen became the first person to ever set foot at the South Pole. It tells the story of an ancient, shape-shifting alien, thawed out of the Antarctic ice by a crew of scientists and roughnecks, which promptly reanimates and escapes.
"You damned beast got loose. I fell asleep about 20 minutes ago, and when I woke up, the thing was gone. Hey, Doc, the hell you say those things can't come to life? Blair's blasted potential life developed a hell of a lot of potential and walked out on us."
Once loose, it promptly starts copying and replacing members of the crew in an attempt to hide in plain sight until it can escape the icy confines of Antarctica and take over the world.
It can imitate us. Dogs can't make 400 miles to the sea. There's no food. There aren't any squawgulls to imitate it this season. There aren't any penguins this far inland. There's nothing that can reach the sea from this point except us. We've got brains. We can do it. Don't you see? It's got to imitate us. It's got to be one of us. That's the only way it can fly an airplane. Fly a plane for 2 hours and rule. Be all Earth's inhabitants. A world for the taking. If it imitates us.
One sympathizes. What I like so much about this book is that it doesn't emphasize the danger of being assimilated so much as the fear of the danger of being assimilated. The story's told mostly through the third-person limited perspective of meteorologist MacReady, so the reader isn't privy to anything he doesn't already know, and he never sees anyone get assimilated by the thing. He only sees people who have already been assimilated drop their ruse and transform into vicious alien monsters as soon as they're found out. The biggest threat to the crew throughout the book is the prospect of going mad from worry over who's been replaced, which leads to some terrifying breakdowns among some of the more excitable members of the crew.
Kinner shuddered violently. Hey, Mac, would I know if I was a monster? Would I know if the monster already got me? Oh, Lord, I may be a monster already. You'd know, MacReady answered. But we wouldn't. Norris laughed shortly, half hysterically.
Pathologist Blair quickly goes mad from paranoia and is locked away in an isolated cabin to prevent him from killing everyone. Once the nature of the threat is more fully understood, that they're fighting a colony of shape-shifting microorganisms rather than just one monster, MacReady institutes several safety precautions, such as the rule that everyone must travel in groups of 4 or more at all times. An early attempt at developing a blood serum test fails when it's revealed that one of the 2 men developing it had already been assimilated, and is eventually replaced by the much more direct method of simply sticking a hot wire into test tubes full of blood. No doubt the broad strokes of the story will sound familiar to any fan of the most famous adaptation. Armed with this new test, MacReady quickly isolates and destroys every alien imposter in the base. All seems well. Until someone remembers to check on Blair. I won't spoil the ending, but only if you promise to go read it this weekend. There are free PDFs online. Even after 84 years. Wait, has it really been 84? 84 and a half, yeah.
It's been 84 years.
Even after 84 years, the story reads like it could have been written yesterday. I think Antarctica is a big part of that. It's the great equalizer of human foibles. In all that time, Antarctica remains just as remote, hostile, and unforgiving as it was back in the 1930s. Our tools may have advanced, but our concerns are all the same. I really like the way it's written too. The prose itself heightens the suspense. The first attack scene, in which the Thing takes on a kennel full of dogs, is explicit and vicious in its detail.
Barkley leapt forward and jabbed. A weird, shrill scream rose and choked out. The smell of burning flesh in the corridor intensified. Greasy smoke curled up. The red eyes clouded over in a stiffening, jerking travesty of a face. The dogs leapt forward and Barkley yanked back his shovel-handed weapon. The thing on the snow did not move as gleaming teeth ripped it open.
But then in later scenes, the prose is so scant that you have to read it twice just to make sure you understand what happened.
Maybe we can save time. Connett, would you step forward? Again, Barkley was too slow. There were more grins, less tensity still when Barkley and Van Wall finished their work.
Like, that was an attack. A character, Connett, revealed himself to be a thing, and then two other characters fried him with a homemade cattle prod. That's what their work refers to. But the prose isn't so sparse for no reason. It has this effect where you don't know from page to page, hell, from line to line, when, where, or from whom an attack could come, or how quickly things can change. In that way, it makes for a really tense read, where the construction of the text itself feeds into the feelings of paranoia and distrust. Who Goes There was one of the most popular stories ever published in astounding science fiction, but it's hard to argue that it would have remained so popular today if not for its 3 headlining film adaptations, and one in particular. John Carpenter's The Thing wasn't a big hit when it first came out, barely managing to recoup expenses once it finally opened overseas, but it went on to become a cult classic, and then a regular classic, and is now easily the most famous adaptation of the book. So famous, in fact, that the title of this video is Ranking Every Adaptation of The Thing, instead of the technically more accurate Ranking Every Adaptation of Who Goes There. Assuming John Carpenter's unofficial retirement sticks. Not that I'm rooting for that, mind you. Not giving John Carpenter a Dead Space movie to direct is still one of the biggest unforced errors in the industry, if you ask me. But if his retirement sticks, I believe The Thing will be remembered as his magnum opus. And I'm not just saying that because it's never felt more relevant than 3 years deep into an ongoing pandemic.
Nobody trusts anybody now. We're all very tired.
Now, if we went ahead and tried to rank these 3 films, there'd be no contest as to which one came out on top. It's The Thing.
You're gonna have to sleep sometime, McCready.
I'm a real light sleeper, child.
This film is probably why most people are even still talking about the original novel. And not me, mind you, but most people. And the other 2 films are just so different from each other that it feels sort of pointless to try and rank them. It'd be like trying to rank Girl with a Pearl Earring and Saturn devouring his son. You probably know which one you like better, but your preference really says a lot more about you than it does the actual art. If only we had more than just 3 things to compare. Well, in fact, we do. Who Goes There has been adapted not just to film, but to video games, audio dramas, short stories, comic books, board games, coffee table art, even claymation. Basically everything but a musical. God, can you even imagine? The original novel was republished in 2018 with 45 pages of newly discovered material. There's a sequel novel currently being written, and Universal has announced a reboot that'll reportedly stick closer to the original novel than any previous film. Well, now we got a real horse race. Who knows who did it best? I've made a lot of videos about the pandemic over the last 3 years, trying to make some sense of it through my YouTube videos, how it's changed my viewing habits, made me question the future of cinema. I've compiled lists of films that have taken on new meaning for me in quarantine, and struggled to figure out how to even keep watching films, much less make them. And my surest conclusion so far is that you can't fully heal from a trauma until after the trauma is over. But in all that time, there was never any film that better encapsulated the past 3 years quite so completely as The Thing. The isolation, the fear, the shibboleths we've applied to countless friends and family in order to determine their motivations and allegiances. Did you or did you not vote for a crypto-fascist reality TV show host twice? So let's dive right in and see if we can't suss out why we're all so terrified of trusting each other.
Child! What if we're wrong about him?
Why then we're wrong?
In 1950, barely a dozen years after the publication of Who Goes There. Producer Howard Hawks bought the film rights for a reported $1,250 and produced the first film adaptation the following year. The Thing from Another World tells the story of U.S. Air Force Captain Hendry, who's ordered by his superiors down in Anchorage to fly to a remote research base near the North Pole, whose lead scientist, Dr. Carrington, has reported the crash of an unusual aircraft. Well, not aircraft per se. It was moving way too fast enough to be a meteor. But it wasn't a meteor either, because it changed direction as it fell.
A meteor might move almost horizontal to the Earth, but never upward.
Then it isn't a meteor.
That's obvious.
So the men fly out to where it crash landed.
Holy cat! What a weird-looking thing.
They can just make it out beneath the ice. They fan out, trying to gauge its form, and then finally...
It's almost...
Yeah. Almost a perfect...
It is. It's round.
We finally got one.
We found a flying saucer.
They accidentally blow it up trying to free it from the ice, but just when they're about to return home empty-handed, they spot one more thing down there.
What is it? Looks like a man.
Yeah, it's got legs and a head. I can see him.
Yeah, he must be over 8 feet long.
Somebody got out of that saucer?
Got out or was thrown out and frozen fast before he could get clear.
The Thing from Another World is a really good film. I say that because I think a lot of people tend to write it off as the septuagenarian predecessor of a far superior remake. But let me just remind those people that the only reason John Carpenter wanted to make The Thing in the first place is because of how much he loved this film. There's a reason this was the highest grossing science fiction film of 1951, beating out both The Day the Earth Stood Still and When Worlds Collide. The Thing from Another World made a lot of superficial changes to the book, but it still preserves the same basic premise. A hostile alien gets dug out of the Arctic ice by a team of scientists and roughnecks, and then promptly goes on a rampage once it's thawed out back at base. There's no copying and replacing crew members in this one, just the threat of being killed and drained of all your blood so that the monster can then grow enough seed pods to take over the world. But if that sounds like a disappointing oversimplification of the novel, don't worry, there's still an interesting new wrinkle. A human villain, Dr. Carrington, who's so fascinated by the monster that he quickly decides to prioritize its safety over the lives of everyone else at the base.
I think it far better if science rather than
Doctor,
the
are you
army.
sure this is the right thing to
This
do?
time I'm sure we can communicate with it. We must.
Throughout the film, he repeatedly ignores orders, abandons his post, cultivates seed pods without anyone else's knowledge, and by the end of the film, he's straight up holding people at gunpoint so that they don't hurt the monster.
This is an enemy right here.
There are no
Even now,
enemies in
maybe.
science, Professor. Only phenomena to study.
One of the things I like so much about this adaptation is that pretty much all the changes from the book are really interesting changes. They're never for no reason. See, in the novel, the base was all but completely cut off from the outside world, whereas here, the team is in constant radio contact with their superiors, and yet that only makes things harder for them. See, the generals down in Anchorage agree with Dr. Carrington, that the monster should be studied, not destroyed.
Fogarty to Henry. Use every means to protect lives of entire party, but take no steps against your prisoner.
Our prisoner. There you are again. You can't ignore orders from your commanding officer.
Even the switch from the South to the North Pole wasn't done for nothing. When the film first came out, Alaska had recently undergone a massive infrastructure and road building initiative, thanks in large part to the military's wartime interest in the US territory closest to both Russia and Japan. And so Alaska was suddenly on people's minds more than ever before, or at least more than Antarctica was.
Hey, taxpayers ought to see this.
But more important than any of that, this being the first adaptation of the novel into a new medium, how does it translate the paranoia on the page to the screen? Well, one of the ways they do it is by keeping almost all the violence off screen. Either the camera isn't present to witness an attack,
The greenhouse. See?
or the attack itself is deliberately kept out of frame. Now, at first you might be tempted to conclude that they only did this to appease the censors, but it feels more to me like a deliberate stylistic choice. It reinforces this feeling that the monster could be anywhere and attack at any time. That isn't to say that all the attacks are unexpected, though. After establishing our fear of off-screen space, the movie puts it to good use by heavily foreshadowing certain attacks.
Someone has entered and gone and locked the door from the
Outside.
See how it glistens in the light?
It's a smear of plant sap. From the wounded arm?
You don't suppose? Open it, please.
The movie's filled with these great one-ers where the crew realizes where the monster's hiding or that it's closing in on them, and there's a frantic shoring up of defenses, coiling of tension before a sudden burst of explosive violence. In this way, it almost feels more like a precursor to Alien than The Thing, which is a stunning endorsement either way. It would take a lot of time and talent to finally best it, and for all I know, that's why nobody tried to readapt Who Goes There for another 31 years. Then in June of 1982, a dog went for a run. John Carpenter's The Thing begins with a much more formidable opening than its predecessor. An Alaskan Malamute is being chased by a helicopter through the frozen wastes of Antarctica. We have no context for this, no clue as to why this is happening. The dog eventually makes its way to an American research station, U.S. Outpost 31, where the bewildered staff are just as confused as the audience by what they see. The helicopter crew is quickly killed, and the Americans are left wondering what the hell happened at the nearby Swedish base.
You really want to save those crazy Swedes, huh?
Norwegian base. Let's start with the only critique that really matters. The Thing stars the world's greatest animal actor. Jed was an Alaskan Malamute/wolf hybrid who lived from 1977 to 1995 and had starring roles in such dog-centric classics as The Journey of Natty Gann and White Fangs 1 and 2. Jed didn't do what a lot of dog actors tend to do on set. He didn't get distracted by anything off screen, and he didn't wag his tail when he knew he was being a good boy. He just stared. It's the most thoroughly undog-like performance I've ever seen, and I've seen dogs performed by non-dog actors. Jed's performance is critical here. It has to be unnervingly unnerving, because it's the only real clue we have that those two Norwegians weren't crazy. Helicopter pilot R.J. McCready and Doc Copper, two characters restored from the original novel, traveled to the Norwegian base to try and figure out what happened, and discover a massacre. Consider this your content warning for blood, guts, and self-harm.
Anybody there? Hey, Sweden! Not Swedish, Mac, the Norwegian. My God, what the hell happened here?
They then discover a giant block of ice that clearly used to house something, and then make their way outside, where they find the most disturbing sight yet.
Is that a man in there or something?
McCready and Copper load up the misshapen corpse, the thing that they found in the snow, and bring it back to base, where pathologist Blair performs an autopsy, the results of which are as surprising as they are unhelpful.
Well, what we got here is what appears to be, anyway, a normal set of internal organs. Heart, lungs, kidneys, liver.
And just when the audience is primed to fear the terrors beyond our comprehension that are embodied by the corpse, violence finally breaks out from a much more familiar source. John Carpenter and his frequent cinematographer Dean Cundey have always been big on weaponizing off-screen space. You never know what's lurking just outside the frame in any given scene. But The Thing is their magnum opus.
Where's the rest?
They're not just weaponizing off-screen space, they're weaponizing off-screen scenes.
Flair! Maybe he tried to burn it! Maybe he burned himself before it could get to him.
Mild spoiler alert, Palmer is eventually revealed to be a thing. But we never see when it happened, when he was assimilated. We never even see when it could have happened. We were given no way to deduce that it had. His last line before the scene is him snitching on the walking head.
You gotta be fucking kidding.
I mean, I guess it could have happened here, when Jed corners someone who's only seen in silhouette, but it could have just as easily been someone else. Plus, I've heard multiple sources say that Carpenter put a random crew member into the shot, specifically so that there'd be no way to know who got infected.
And that's the point. You're not supposed to know.
Much of the film feels like it's happening off camera, almost like whole scenes are missing.
Somebody blew out a fuse in the lab. Lights were out in there for an hour. Any one of us could have gotten to him.
We hardly ever know how much time has passed between the scenes. Some of them just straight up end in mid-conversation with a random fade-out, which can feel more than a bit disorienting on first watch. Even MacReady, who's the closest thing to a point-of-view character that we ever get, disappears for random stretches at a time, with no authorial accounting as to where he's been. By the end of the film, characters are straight up dying off camera.
How's it coming in there?
Disappearing between shots like they missed their name on the call sheet that day. But it's not a mistake, or bad continuity. The confusion, the uncertainty, the unpredictability, that's exactly why the film is so terrifying. I submit that this shot is 10,000 times scarier than this one. You're not supposed to know exactly when, or exactly who, or even exactly what just happened from moment to moment. All you really need to know is what the stakes are.
Write that down. Stakes are more important than continuity.
Because even when the scenes seem like they're spinning off the rails, with bodies piling up, and props flying, or people shouting back and forth and over-talking each other, the camera always makes sure the audience knows what matters most.
The Thing didn't garner a lot of critical praise when it first came out. I wrote my undergraduate thesis on The Thing, and I actually had a lot of fun compiling all the contemporary negative reviews.
Newsweek's David Anson wrote that Bill Lancaster's script is so low on characterization that even a first-rate cast of character actors is unable to work up any team spirit. Alan Spencer of Starlog magazine said that it has no pace, sloppy continuity, zero humor, and bland characters.
So, zero humor?
Now that is just factually incorrect.
Maybe we're at war with Norway.
Linda Gross of the Los Angeles Times said that it was bland, despairing, and nihilistic. What we're finally left with is the film's abiding paranoia and its gruesome, empty effects. In fact, the vast majority of negative reviews singled out the film's special effects as a crucial focal point, but with opinions swinging both ways. Daryl Moore said that the effects are so extreme they prevent many people from focusing on the story, whereas David Sterrett of the Christian Science Monitor said that the movie was a slick thriller with expertly handled monster scenes that are as scary as they are sickening. These conflicting sentiments are perhaps best summed up by Roger Ebert, who simply said The Thing was a great barf bag movie.
I can't begin to tell you why The Thing failed to find its audience back in 1982. It wasn't for lack of trying, or for lack of relevance.
My favorite scene couldn't have been more relevant to the times. It's the dynamite torch standoff between MacReady and Childs.
Anyone messes with me and the whole camp goes.
And yet of all the contemporary reviews I ever read, nobody ever drew any connections between the dynamite torch standoff and the guiding principles of mutual assured destruction.
Deterrence is the art of producing in the mind of the enemy the fear to attack.
The idea that neither side attacks because of a guaranteed lethal counterstrike.
You're not going to launch nuclear weapons. You're going to kill them and us at the same time.
Which was the perceived nuclear defense policy of the United States at the time of the film's release. But it hadn't always been. This was a newfound relevance.
See, Ronald Reagan took office on January 20th, 1981, and almost immediately began reversing all the policies of détente that had previously been thawing out the Cold War over the previous decade.
President Jimmy Carter had previously mothballed the B-1 bomber program. Reagan revived it. The U.S. Air Force also produced the MX Peacekeeper ICBM at Reagan's urging. And when the Soviet Union first introduced the SS-20 ballistic missile in 1976, Reagan backed NATO's deployment of the Pershing II missile in West Germany.
This dramatic increase in defense spending, and on nuclear deployment strategies in particular, helped fuel the resurgence of mutual assured destruction in the minds of the American public for the first time in a generation.
And here we have MacReady and Childs demonstrating the operating principles of said defense strategy beat for beat.
Anybody touches me, and we go.
This is mostly what my undergraduate thesis was about, how the cultural fears of the Cold War are embodied in the film.
The way the blood test can be interpreted as metaphors for all the various ways in which paranoid Americans sought to test and reaffirm their own national identities throughout the 1980s.
That's another reason why I think setting it in Antarctica works so well.
It's the only continent without nations, governments, citizenship, or even national borders. All anyone can do in Antarctica is look for a national identity elsewhere. I had a lot of trouble coming up with some synoptic thoughts about this film. It's one of those movies I like so much, it's hard to explain why. After all, we don't love films for how they weaponize off-screen space or construct metaphors about foreign policy. That's all very interesting, but it doesn't explain why we connect to this film on such a visceral human level. Then when I was deep in post-production, it finally dawned on me. I've been babbling an awful lot over the past 3 years about how death has been on my mind more than ever before. And this feeling in my gut, which the movie validates, is the idea that death is inevitable. I mean, we all know that. Mortality has a 100% clearance rate. It's coming for us all. But that's not the kicker. The kicker is that 9 times out of 10, our deaths are stupid. I don't mean stupid in that they're a result of anyone's stupidity, but just that they all too often have nothing to do with how we live our lives. Most people's deaths feel pretty arbitrary, unfair, and frankly, kind of pointless. Last words do little to validate how we go out.
They're dead, Mac!
Most of us won't even be remembered for how we go. But what that means is that the pressure's off. We don't need to derive meaning from our own deaths. That's what our lives are for. And what better way to live your life than to spend it minimizing the harm that comes to others?
We're not getting out of here alive. But neither's that thing.
The movie's certainly not trying to moralize to its audience. This is not the message of the film, let me be clear. This is just what I take from it. Because this is exactly the kind of story that I've been needing ever since I became an adult.
Yeah, fuck you too!
And the results have been speaking for themselves for over 40 years.
So despite all its brilliance, The Thing hit theaters in 1982, failed to turn heads at the box office, and quickly faded into obscurity.
Carpenter has said that he only took his next directing gig, the adaptation of Stephen King's Christine, basically as a way to keep working, and to do something more mainstream in order to get his career back on track.
It's hard to track The Thing's eventual rise in popularity. Like, I don't actually know when the public perception switched from negative to positive in those pre-internet days. But I do know when someone first tried to make a sequel.
It was 1991, and it took the form of a comic book. The Thing from Another World was a 2-issue comic book miniseries published by Dark Horse Comics, and it marks something of a watershed moment in the history of the franchise, because for the next 30-some-odd years, the whole world basically ignored Who Goes There in favor of making direct sequels and prequels to The Thing.
Most sources will tell you there were 3 comic book adaptations of The Thing. Other sources say 4, so how many is it?
5, actually.
The Thing from Another World, Climate of Fear, Eternal Vows, Questionable Research, and The Northman Nightmare. John Carpenter has said that The Thing from Another World is his favorite non-canonical sequel to The Thing.
But as for me, I just think it goes to show just how hard it is to make a good sequel.
It basically just runs the same gamut as the movie, but with a lot more guns. The first issue picks up right after the movie ends. Childs marches MacReady to the Antarctic coast and then leaves him to be picked up by a Japanese fishing vessel. MacReady then tests himself to make sure he isn't infected, and then steals a helicopter and flies back to the ruins of Outpost 31 to make sure that the thing is really destroyed. But so, we're already 11 pages into this 62-page miniseries, and we're only right back where we started. MacReady uses up all his helicopter fuel to re-burn the remains of the thing, and then the US military shows up. They instantly assume that MacReady murdered everyone and place him under arrest. Someone then touches one of the burned out things, with a gloved hand, but I guess it doesn't matter because as soon as the rescue helicopter touches down, it attacks. The man having apparently been assimilated out in the open through his clothes.
This is all... It all feels really forced and inconsistent to me. It's too easy for the thing to infect people, first of all. Plus, it's hard to tell what's even going on half the time.
A lot happens between panels, and it's not always easy to tell what's going on. Like these two here. In panel 1, MacReady and Childs open fire on someone who they know to be infected. And in panel 2, well, you tell me. What would you say is happening here? Has MacReady just been shot? No, it was actually MacReady doing the shooting. This is a counter shot of the previous panel. But the way the eye scans down the page, it looks like MacReady's been shot, because the wounded character's head has been placed in the exact same spot that MacReady was in the previous panel. It definitely doesn't help that all 6 faces in these panels are completely obscured. It really feels less like a comic and more like a storyboard, which is a completely different art form. Anyway, one of the things eventually makes its way onto a nuclear submarine, and while it's busy assimilating the crew, Childs blows open an exterior hatch in order to try and drown it. MacReady somehow makes it to the surface, where he will most assuredly die, and then it ends. Brief, bloody, and wholly unsatisfying, if you ask me.
The second series is much better, if you ask me, but it still has its issues.
The Thing from Another World: Climate of Fear was a 4-issue miniseries published in the summer of 1992. The series was written by John Arcudi, with pencils by Jim Somerville and inks by Brian Garvey. Except it wasn't Brian Garvey. They printed the wrong name. They acknowledged the error and properly credited Robert Jones in the following issue. Do you like how thoroughly I fact-check my videos on this unmonetized YouTube channel with no active sponsors? Check out my Patreon in the link below. So Climate of Fear picks up right after the last series ended, with MacReady being rescued from the ocean and brought to a remote research base at the southern tip of Argentina. But of course, someone on the rescue team somehow got infected and quickly starts assimilating members of the base.
So right off the bat, we have a big problem.
We're not in Antarctica, which means the Thing can assimilate the first bird or squirrel it comes across and then hightail it back to civilization. Except it doesn't. It's not even a concern. MacReady's worried that he'll infect the squirrel in this panel. Besides the mass culling of a single herd of sheep, nobody worries about the Thing infecting any wildlife. Huge gaping hole in the plot.
But if you suspend your disbelief for that one little detail, it's a pretty fun read.
The story likes to set up similar story beats to the movie and then subvert your expectations. Like there's a guy who's clearly acting fishy. So fishy you'd expect him to be human because no thing would act that suspicious if it couldn't help it. And then he turns out to be an alien. That's fun. It's like subverting 2 expectations at once. Issue 2 ends on a great cliffhanger when MacReady's blood suddenly reacts to a flame. He knows he's still human, so why is his blood reacting like that? These are fun questions to see pop up. It's also got a lot of nice pulpy artwork, lots of great transformations and attack sequences. The story isn't treading a whole lot of new ground, but it still gives me the distinct impression that the writers were trying to subvert our expectations rather than simply satisfy them. The third series, Eternal Vows, is a mess. Just like a hot mess.
I don't even want to spend too much time on this one. It's bad. I'm half convinced it began life as a completely different monster story, and then Dark Horse just forced it into the Thing narrative halfway through.
One of the things makes its way to the small fishing community off the coast of New Zealand, and then bestows its powers of assimilation onto a woman who decides she's not going to assimilate anyone, but just sort of like eat a bunch of them. MacReady and a New Zealand detective pick up her trail. She never puts on any clothes. And she eventually does finally turn someone who promptly starts assimilating the whole island. I don't know, it really doesn't feel like even the same monster. Too much monologuing about its motivations. I can't tell you how it ends, because for some reason issue 4 is more expensive than the other 3 issues combined, and it's just so bad that I wasn't that curious to find out how it ends. According to the Thing wiki, there's a climactic showdown at sea, which just ends with the last surviving Thing transforming into a fish and swimming off, which it was free to do at any point in this story. I mean, that's how it got to the island in the first place. Not really sure what they were trying to do with this one.
By the time I reached miniseries 4, I was tired.
The best one so far is merely decent, and they aren't cheap. I spent more money on the comics than any other single piece of media in this video, but I wanted to be thorough, so I got my hands on the 4th miniseries, Questionable Research, and I gotta say,
the very best thing about this series is also the very, very worst. It's way too short.
Although technically 4 issues long, it has to share space in each issue with a bunch of other serialized stories. So there's really only about 8 or 9 pages worth of story in each issue. So all told, this is only about a single comic's worth of narrative. And it's nothing we haven't seen before. Scientists recover a Thing specimen from Antarctica, they bring it back to a ship, it gets loose in a really contrived way, goes on a very brief rampage, and we're left with a sole survivor set adrift at sea. There is nothing of distinction here, and the artwork, no offense, is some of the worst yet. It's ugly, boring, and indistinct. All I'm saying is, I'm thinking there's a reason this was the last comic book adaptation of The Thing for the next 18 years.
The fifth and so far final comic book adaptation came in 2011.
As a one-issue prequel called The Northman Nightmare. The Thing versus Vikings. There isn't much of a story here. It's only 27 pages long, but it's not a bad story. A nice pulpy little thriller, and I can appreciate the change of scenery. Any excuse for more great artwork, really. And it's free to read online. So maybe not great so much as short enough that you can't get your hopes up, but hey, at least the comic book run is ending better than it began. Overall, The Thing from Another World comics, as much as I can appreciate people trying to sequelize The Thing for the first time, they leave much to be desired. Most of them play fast and loose with the rules of infection, and where the threat of random attacks felt really tense and measured in the book in the first two movies, here it feels really disorienting and contrived. People seem to change whenever it suits the plot, which is pretty bare bones anyway, not much of anything we haven't seen before, with the exception of a few plot twists in Climate of Fear and a bunch of weird rule-breaking stuff in Eternal Vows. Carpenter has said that the first comic series, written by prolific author and ex-Navy SEAL Chuck Farrer, would make for a worthy successor to his film, but I just don't see it. There's nothing new here. The only real draw here is the artwork. The layout isn't any good, but I like the style, where the panels are painted rather than drawn. But then that's less of a reason to buy the comic book than it is to buy the collection of artwork inspired by The Thing that Printed in Blood published in 2017. Seriously, the whole series of comic books is about the same price as the book. So if you want to see a bunch of cool artwork inspired by The Thing, then I'd say this is the thing to buy. Don't get me wrong, sequels are hard, and sequels in a completely different medium are even harder. But I'm convinced we can do better.
Maybe a completely different medium would help. As far as I can tell, there was no new media based on The Thing released between 1993 and 2002.
And that's when Black Label Games and Konami published the first and so far only video game adaptation of The Thing.
We got company!
Which is significant for two reasons. One, because it's still the only canonical sequel to The Thing at the time of this recording, and two, it's the first time anyone ever adapted The Thing to an interactive medium. You play as Blake, a US Special Forces operative who sets down amidst the wreckage of Outpost 31 just a few hours after the events of the film. It's really fun to spend the first 30 minutes of the game exploring the major landmarks of the movie like this.
I'm gonna hide this tape when I'm finished. If none of us make it, at least there'll be some kind of a record.
Yes, it's fan service, but it's well-contextualized fan service. You would set down in the ruins of the old base if you wanted to figure out what had happened.
Looks like a goddamn UFO to me. This shit gives me the creeps.
Yeah, we're not alone in the universe and all that crap.
You and a squad of 3 soldiers quickly blow up the remaining wreckage, and then Blake sets off for the nearby Norwegian base to see if he can find any more clues as to what happened.
Besides, if there are any survivors, I'm the only one on the team that speaks Norwegian.
You're just full of surprises, aren't you, Blake? Soon enough, you're blowing away monsters, bouncing between bases, chasing down leads, gaining and losing various squad members at the drop of a hat. And then you eventually discover a secret military base that's been experimenting on things for a while now. The timeline doesn't really make a ton of sense, until you finally face off against the guy who ordered you down to Antarctica in the first place.
But first, I'm afraid I'm gonna have to ask for your weapons.
I'm not doing anything until I get some goddamn answers.
You're out of your league here, Blake.
He's injected himself with a Thing-derived virus, which gives him all of its powers, but still preserves his human mind. But then he just wants to spread the virus to the whole world anyway, so the distinction is kind of academic.
Once I take the chopper, I will begin global infection. Game over?
Anyway, it's a pretty bog-standard video game story, if you ask me. Not horrible, just nothing to write home about.
I don't think we've got time for formal introductions. Can you get us out of here?
I don't think it's much more than an excuse to provide the player with a bunch of different set pieces to blast through. And don't get me wrong, it does a fine job of doing that. Lots of variety in the level design. The scenery keeps changing more than you'd think. Plus, the cinematics are good gory fun. But if you ask me, it's the gameplay that's the real draw here. This is the first interactive adaptation of The Thing, where you get to deal with the logistics and suspicion of infections. Your teammates can get paranoid or even actively rebellious. You gotta make sure they're well supplied with guns and ammo, or administer a blood test to prove you're human before they start following your orders. In fact, for the first hour of the game, I was so focused on proving I wasn't an alien to my squad that I was legitimately shocked when they suddenly turned into things. Unfortunately though, that's about where the suspense ends, with the first reveal. Because once I knew my teammates could be assimilated at any time, no matter what I did, I just stopped worrying about it. There are at least a dozen pre-scripted moments in the game where your teammates transform no matter what, even if you had just used a blood test to prove that they were human. So after the first few levels, I just gave up trying to keep track, and just made sure I was ready to take down a monster at any time, because they're not so difficult to defeat that the prospect of one of them turning on you is ever even a huge problem. In fact, defeating them is actually pretty fun. You gotta lower their health with guns first, and then torch them when their life is low. Sometimes you gotta split your gun and your flamethrower between you and a teammate, and then rely on them to help you make the kill. But then the infection system isn't so dynamic that your teammates ever try to sabotage you in a situation like that. Once you've won over their trust, they'll keep cooperating unless they finally turn.
And for what it's worth, the developers seem to have been well aware of these limitations before the game was even finished.
I found this interview with programmer Diarmid Campbell, who summed it up pretty well.
The infection system was conceived as a simulation that had the capacity to play out differently each time you played the game, leading to potential replayability. However, the game was also very story-led, with set pieces that required specific characters getting infected at certain times. These two aspects were constantly pulling in different directions. I think we ended up with a slightly messy compromise, with good story elements and a genuinely new mechanic, but also some logical inconsistencies, which, ironically, became glaringly obvious if you played the game more than once.
The one time it was actually fun to wonder who was or wasn't infected was this one moment in the game where you enter a room and these two guys have their guns pointed at each other's heads, and you have to figure out who's who, and I only had one blood test on me. It would have been a real conundrum, if not for the fact that the first guy I tested immediately transformed. I didn't even bother testing the other guy after that, because I knew he'd help me so long as he was in human form.
Area looks secure.
It's not a bad game, though. Just ignore what the camera does whenever I open my inventory. Any 20-year-old game is going to be a little buggy when played on modern hardware. Whee! Sometimes teammates will disappear between levels, taking their guns and ammo with them. That can be annoying. Like, the last level of the game is clearly meant to be played with a sniper rifle, but I had just given it to a teammate before the level started, and then he disappeared between loading screens. So I was forced to beat the whole level with a machine gun. That was annoying. Combat's still fun though. You're always presented with new challenges. Like, one of my favorite levels is when you wake up in a lab overrun with things, and you have no weapons on you, so you have to lead them from room to room and then lock them inside. And nobody tells you to do this. You have to figure it out on your own, and it feels really satisfying to accomplish by yourself. And I gotta say, fan service or not, I couldn't help but cheer when MacReady suddenly showed up to help me fight the final boss.
Need some help? Yeah, no shit.
Blake, I think this is the start of a beautiful friendship.
Overall, this is a really fun and really interesting addition to the franchise.
Not perfect by any means, and it really doesn't feel very canonical to me, since the story is clearly in service to the gameplay and not the other way around. But still well worth checking out, and if you ask me, ripe for a remake with modern hardware. Oh, and if you're interested in other video games that clearly took some inspiration from The Thing, I'd suggest Dead Space, of course, and then also Distrust, which is an inventory management game set amidst an alien invasion in Antarctica, and Carrion, where you play as an alien monster looking to escape a secret government facility.
things went quiet for nearly a decade after the release of The Thing.
Apparently there was a sequel in development for a while, but it got cancelled before it went into production, and for the rest of the decade, we all just had to make do with Dead Space.
Then with the dawn of the 2010s came an exciting new adaptation and an exciting new medium.
Hey, wait, stop!
Didn't I say? There is no musical adaptation of The Thing. What would that even look like?
In January 2010, Peter Watts wrote a 6,800-word short story called The Things, which is an adaptation of Carpenter's film as told from the perspective of the Thing. It's read by Kate Baker for Clarkesworld magazine.
It feels almost obscene, an offense against creation itself, to stay stuck in this skin. It's so ill-suited to its environment that it needs to be wrapped in multiple layers of fabric just to stay warm. There are a myriad of ways I could optimize it. Shorter limbs, better insulation, a lower surface to volume ratio. All these shapes I still have within me, and I dare not use any of them. Even to keep out the cold, I dare not adapt. In this place, I can only hide.
The story recounts the whole film from The Thing's perspective and offers a unique opportunity to understand its motivations and mindset, what it makes of its first contact with human beings. In a word, it's disturbed, horrified by our primitive individual consciousnesses, our defenseless central nervous systems, our pitiful mortality, and sees assimilation, which it calls communion, as a gift to our species that the residents of US Outpost 31 are mad to reject.
What kind of a world rejects communion? It is the simplest, most irreducible insight that biomass can have. The more you can change, the more you can adapt. Adaptation is fitness. Adaptation is survival. It's deeper than intelligence, deeper than tissue. It is cellular. It is axiomatic. And more, it is pleasurable. To take communion is to experience the sheer sensual delight of bettering the cosmos. And yet, even trapped in these maladapted skins, this world doesn't want to change.
This is the best possible way to get inside the mind of the Thing, if you ask me. You make it the point of view character.
Other media has tried to explore the Thing's motivations by giving it some really weird, out-of-place speeches, but the impression I always got from both the book and the movie is that the Thing has zero interest in explaining itself. Whereas here, it's still not trying to explain itself to anyone, but the interior monologue is chilling enough.
I was so blind, so quick to blame, but the violence I've suffered at the hands of these things reflect no great evil. They're simply so used to pain, so blinded by disability, that they literally can't conceive of any other existence. When every nerve is whipped raw, you lash out at even the lightest touch. So I will keep up appearances. I will work behind the scenes. I will save them from the inside, where their unimaginable loneliness will never end.
I don't want to say too much more about this one, in part because you can go listen to it right now.
It's only 50 minutes long and freely available online. Link in the description. You have my permission to pause this video and go listen to it right now.
If I had one complaint, really just a nitpick, it would be how quickly it confirms that Childs was indeed assimilated by the end of the film.
Sooner than that, actually. It says he was already partially infected and well on his way to full assimilation as early as the blood test scene.
It's a crock of shit.
This is a consistent peeve of mine, how frequently all the sequels and adaptations tend to write off Childs. He dies of hypothermia in the first level of the video game and is assimilated in the comics, whereas I just don't buy it.
Childs! What if we're wrong about him?
Why think we're wrong?
You mean to tell me this man, this guy right here, wasn't gonna make it? Wasn't gonna do whatever it took to survive? Bullshit.
You're a dead man, MacReady!
Apparently there was some talk in the late aughts about remaking the Thing, but then in 2011, producers Mark Abraham and Eric Newman opted to produce a prequel instead, which somewhat confusingly got the exact same title. Like, not even a subtitle, Whereas if you ask me, there was a much better option staring them in the face.
And the last place you want to be is cooped up with a dozen Norwegian guys. Trust me.
The Thing: The prequel to The Thing is one of those films with a production history that's actually more interesting than the film itself.
Director Matthias Van Hannigan was reportedly so fed up by the end of production that he took a 10-year break from feature films. All the practical effects from on set were hastily replaced with CGI in post-production, and I've even read reports that they were conducting reshoots just 2 weeks before the premiere.
So all that aside, is it any good? Well, I definitely don't think it's bad per se, but it definitely didn't set its sights very high.
What we wind up with is little more than a slick restaging of the first film. In a suspiciously modern-looking 1982, with no mullets or perms in sight, a multinational team made up of some Norwegians, but of course 2 American leads.
I want to know how the Cavaliers are doing.
I don't follow football.
This basketball team.
Discover an alien spaceship buried under the Antarctic ice, along with a frozen biological specimen. The callous lead biologist insists on taking a tissue sample then and there.
Before we do, I'm going to take a tissue sample.
Do you really think that's a good idea?
Yes, I do.
Which leads to it busting free and running amok amidst the base. It doesn't take long for biologist Kate to deduce that the alien is replacing members of the team and trying to imitate its way back to the mainland.
It attacks its prey. Copies it perfectly. And then hides inside it. Waiting.
The script manages to come up with a handful of genuinely tense moments, and several expectation-defying surprises.
You said there were 5?
But overall, I just think it's woefully unnecessary. This really isn't anything we haven't seen before, and after waiting almost 30 years for a new adaptation, it's hard not to be disappointed. But then that's the nature of prequels. Their ability to shock and surprise is severely hamstrung by the fact that they're writing to known outcomes. And this one isn't leading us to those known conclusions in any especially creative ways.
Don't touch it.
Although I do think it's well executed for what it is, and builds to a surprisingly emotional climax. Like, this is not a boring film. That's why I tend to defend it whenever I hear people bashing it, even though I understand why a lot of people hate it. The cast is first-rate, the pacing is really good, and I even thought the much-maligned CGI did a pretty decent job of being affectingly creepy. Like, look at this. You can't tell me this doesn't give you the willies. Of course, I would have preferred keeping the practical effects. I think they look much better. Amalgamated Dynamics is the company that made them, and after posting several behind-the-scenes videos soon after the film's release, they managed to kickstart an independent film, Harbinger Down, which showcases a nearly 100% practical version of the frozen, shape-shifting monster story, which is well worth checking out.
Overall, The Thing: The prequel to John Carpenter's remake of The Thing from Another World leaves us in a quandary. Is it better to set your sights really high and then completely miss the mark? Or is it better to lower your expectations and nail it? Maybe John Carpenter himself said it best.
When asked what he thought of the prequel when it had just entered production, what he said was, "I know they have a photo of a very attractive looking girl with a flamethrower in her hands. How bad can this movie be?" The film didn't quite earn back its budget at the box office, grossing $31.5 million on a $38 million budget, and interest in the property once again died out for the next several years.
I guess it's only fitting then that when it did finally come back, it was in an entirely new form.
In 2017, Mondo Games released The Thing: Infection at Outpost 31, a 3 to 8 player board game that sees you taking on the identity of one of the characters from the film, who then has to team up with the other players in order to escape the base. But the twist is that at least one of you is infected. See, that's why you need at least 3 players, because if you only have 2, you'd both know who's infected instantly. The infected player has to either sabotage the base or escape to the mainland undetected.
So this is the very first hidden identity game I ever played. And going into it, I was skeptical. Is it really so much fun to lie about your intentions and goals to the other players? But it turned out to be one of my new favorite board games.
Each turn is comprised of one mission leader choosing a few team members to complete a mission. The team members then provide resources that are required to accomplish the mission, with various rewards or consequences depending on whether or not the mission succeeds. A room could catch fire, or you could be attacked by some version of the thing. The infected player, meanwhile, may choose to try and sabotage the mission, or at least make it harder to complete. Or they could choose to just play along and hope for a ride out in the helicopter. Everybody's free to say whatever they want throughout the game. Like in my match, everyone made a point of announcing which resources they were passing to the team captain on each mission, but nobody can actually look at the cards until they're all in one big pile. So you'd have a situation where two people might say they're handing over an axe, but then when the cards are revealed, there's only one, and so now you know one of them is lying.
So why lie at all? Why not just do your best to help out and then ride out in the helicopter? Well, because the humans aren't exactly defenseless.
As the game progresses, the team captains are able to administer more blood tests, and turn flamethrowers on the people they suspect of being things. Plus, the helicopter can only fly 3 people out, so if more than 3 people are alive at the end of the game, everyone has to vote on which 3 get a ride.
In the game that I played, I was infected from the very start, and I managed to avoid detection until the very end. But when it came time to vote on which 3 players got to ride off on the helicopter, I wasn't picked, and so I still lost. It's really fun though. It's one of my favorite kinds of games, where you have fun even if you lose.
Where the video game tried and failed to integrate the elements of distrust and paranoia from the film into an interactive medium, Mondo nailed it. I guess the human brain is a much more powerful processor than whatever is in the PS2.
There were 2 other board games based on The Thing that came out after this one.
Who Goes There by Certifiable Studios, and The Thing the Board Game, which is the only one that's officially licensed by Universal. They're all hidden identity games with similar infection mechanics. Even the game boards themselves look pretty similar, but I haven't played the other 2. It's not a matter of being thorough, though. It's more an issue of I don't have enough friends. You need 3 to 8 people to play each game, and it's really better with 8.
And I just don't know that many people in Seattle yet. One of the disadvantages of moving cross-country in the middle of a pandemic. The one time I have managed to play Infection at Outpost 31 with 8 other players, other people had to fly in from other countries.
So I figure if I can't playtest them properly right now, I should probably exclude them from this video.
Maybe that'll change down the road. Right now I just think it's funny that a game all about isolation and paranoia has to be played with a whole lot of friends.
But for now, suffice it to say that Infection at Outpost 31 is my current favorite interactive adaptation of The Thing.
In 2018, John Campbell Jr.'s biographer discovered an early draft of Who Goes There with about 40 additional pages of unpublished material.
A New Opening, which chronicles MacReady and company digging the alien up out of the ice and bringing it back to camp, most of which was already depicted in The Thing from Another World. It was republished in its entirety as Frozen Hell in 2019.
Now, if you ask me, there's a reason this opening was cut.
It's not bad, it's just completely unnecessary. It doesn't tell us anything that'll become important later. It's just a bunch of extra details about the condition in which they find the monster. It's also got a very different tone from the rest of the book. More of a dry, speculative sci-fi than a true horror. And I just spent the whole 40 pages waiting for the action to start. Although the introduction by Robert Silverberg does include one of the wildest pieces of biographical information about its author, about any author really, that I think I've ever read. And it makes Who Goes There one of the few horror novels whose reported inspiration might be even creepier than the actual text.
John Campbell Jr.'s mother had been one of a pair of identical twins, so much like each other that as a small boy, he was unable to tell them apart. The sisters disliked each other, and the aunt disliked her nephew. And on occasion, he would come home from school to seek comfort from his mother for some mishap that day, only to be coldly rebuffed by a woman who was actually his aunt.
That's fucked up.
But the discovery ignited a renewed interest in the original novel, and suddenly there was a Kickstarter to help publish Short Things.
A collection of short stories inspired by Who Goes There, written by some of the industry's leading sci-fi horror authors.
None of the stories are canon, But to me, that's a big part of the appeal. The authors are unburdened by licensing and continuity, so they're free to explore the world of the thing as they see fit, take it in new, interesting directions. And I think it strikes a really great balance.
Apollyon by G.D. Falkson tells what is basically a remixed version of the story we already know, except it's set in ancient Rome, with the thing assimilating monks and centurions in a Mediterranean monastery.
Maybe there are many demons, Simon offered, picking himself up from the floor. Legion, like in the Bible. One demon for every limb, for every portion of the body. Cut off the hand, the demon in the hand tries to escape. Blood, he cried, as the idea came to him. What if there are devils lurking in the victim's blood? If we could bleed one out, it would be trapped and it would try to escape.
Then there's According to a Reliable Source by Alan M. Steele, which is set in the immediate aftermath of the original novel, when the surviving crew members return to the United States, and MacReady has to try and get the story of what happened to a tabloid reporter before the government can suppress it.
It didn't have to devour men or dogs or cows to take us over. All it had to do was scratch its dandruff or fart or sneeze, particularly sneeze. That's the perfect way, the innocuous way that nobody thought of, to get a few cells airborne, after which they were just lying in wait patiently in our lungs or on our skin and clothing until we let our guard down, and then slowly, stealthily, those cells call out to other cells, in dreams perhaps, and come together, and whammo! They take over the planet.
Then there's Mission at T Prime by Kristen Catherine Rush, which takes place thousands of years in the future after humanity has become an advanced spacefaring race and travels to the thing's homeworld in order to destroy it, with unexpected consequences.
She watched the timer ticking down, and then she said in her most forceful voice, "Fire." Not fire at will, which was what she was supposed to say, but fire. So they fired at her will, so that, if their weapons were active, she was responsible and no one else.
It's been said that anthologies are only as good as their worst story, but I really like what they put together here. Even the stories I didn't like, I can still appreciate what they're trying to do. Every story tries something different. Every story gives you something you haven't seen before.
The Horror on the Super Yacht by Mark McLaughlin follows a group of vapid fashion models and social media influencers who are quickly being assimilated on an Antarctic photo shoot.
A few minutes later, Caffeine, Delectable, Anemone, and Time Bomb showed up, walking together in a tight, silent group. Piedmont was surprised to see that none of them had bothered to apply any makeup or hair products.
Thingmaker by Paul DeFilippo takes place in an alternate reality in 1943, which sees the United States quickly defeat Nazi Germany with the help of the nuclear-powered anti-gravity technology that MacReady and the gang brought back from Antarctica. The government has since moved on to creating a benign form of the thing that they hope to eventually use to cure world hunger.
Anyone care for a taste? No? Too bad, but it is past my lunch. Luria plucked off a piece of the alien-sourced meat and popped it into his mouth. Delbruck did the same. We have all enjoyed several such meals without suffering any consequences other than a full stomach.
Cold Storage by Kevin J. Anderson and Good is Dead by Nina Karicki Hoffman are the two creepiest stories of the collection, if you ask me.
Self-consciously wiped his hand on a napkin, then froze. Looked down at his fingers at the pages he'd been touching. He swallowed hard. If Blair was contaminated when he'd written this journal, how long would the germs endure?
There's even one story, which I'll go ahead and call my favorite, which doesn't even feature an appearance from the thing, but rather deals with the PTSD that manifests in some of the survivors. All in all, it's a very cool read, and one that I enjoyed much more on my second read-through. The first time around, I just spent way too much time trying to get ahead of each story, trying to figure out which ones were taking place within the continuity of the original novel and which ones were merely inspired by it, waiting for the thing to make an appearance. But in hindsight, that was a lot of wasted anticipation. But then on the second read, knowing how each story ends, I was able to simply appreciate each story for its own merits.
With all that said, I've tried to keep this section as spoiler-free as possible, lest it discourage anyone from checking out this highly recommended collection.
What is with you guys? I'm not gonna say it again, there is no musical of The Thing. At the time of this recording, there's currently a sequel novel being written by John Betancourt,
the editor of Short Things, which is provisionally titled The Things from Another World, and Blumhouse Pictures has announced a reboot film that'll reportedly stick closer to the original novel than any previous adaptation. Consider me cautiously optimistic for both.
We'll see.
But even with all this media at our fingertips, and with even more coming down the pipe, something still feels missing. There's never been a straight-up sequel to Carpenter's film, and that feels like an egregious oversight.
There's so many exciting directions you could take the story, as the expanded media has shown us.
We know that authors have been pitching ideas since at least the early 90s, but for whatever reason, it just hasn't gelled.
I'm gonna write a sequel to The Thing. Someday. If no one else will. I have an idea for a sequel, and for once, nobody gets to hear it until I'm actually paid to say it.
You gotta fight for your right to party!
But even so, I'm kind of tired of ending videos with pitches for other projects. Life is short, and I want to get to getting. And who the hell would just hand me the reins to a Thing sequel anyway? Don't I need some credentials? Well, I have an idea. Something that would allow me to do something creative for a change, and take the franchise in an exciting new direction. Prove I understand how this property works, and I don't even need any permission or money from a studio. I could even take a break from being a critic, and fulfill a specific promise I made nearly 3 years ago on this very channel.
It does it all. You want credentials? I'll show you credentials.
This is RJ McCready, US Outpost 31. We found an ancient alien and it killed everyone. I'm the only one left now, except maybe Childs, but neither of us are gonna make it for more than just a little while. So I'd better back up and tell you the story, all that happened from the beginning. It all started with a chopper from Norway, or was it Sweden? Geography's a rarity in U.S. public schooling, so forgive me if I name a state and need an overruling. We've got bigger fish to fry, there's explosions and shooting. I care more about the death than some damn nations attributing. A husky chased across the ice, the sniper taking aim. One shot dead, one blown up, but Doc corrects the name.
They're Norwegian, Mac!
Now who knows what's going on? This husky has free reign, so forgive me if I call the man a Finn, a Dutch, or Dane. An unprecedented fight against a century epidemic.
Finnish? Danish?
It's all academic.
The men are acting funny, gotta watch them like a hawk. Icelandic? Dutch?
Will you just let me talk?
Gonna hit this little wire and make all the fake ones sing. Norwegian? Swedes?
Or some secret third thing. I'm trying hard to understand the very nature of the threat, and which Nordic land of origin is not essential fact. We've got experts in the fields of pathogens biology, and I wouldn't trade a one for some whiz at geography. So forgive me for this breach of cartographic decorum, but I'd rather like to know who is and isn't one of them. I'm begging everyone to see the forest through the trees, and so long as you're not alien, you've no quarrel with me. An unprecedented fight against a century epidemic.
Finnish? Danish?
It's all academic.
The men are acting funny, gotta watch them like a hawk. Icelandic? Dutch?
Will you just let me talk?
Gonna hit this little wire and make all the fake ones sing. Norwegian? Swedes?
Or some secret third thing. It's not like I know nothing about Scandinavian life. Sweden used to rule Norway till 1905. And before that it was Denmark, which I bet you didn't know. But then none of this will matter if we all die in the snow. Supposing Doc took issue and called me an uncultured brute for suggesting Jed's a husky instead of Alaskan Malamute. Knowledge wouldn't save him from an alien belligerent, but I'm here now to tell the tale, cause R.I.P. I'm built different.
foot is very asleep. Oh, I'm running out of battery, but I need my foot to wake back up before I keep doing this. That's close enough.